Holla ballers! What's going on? It's Breacher. And let's talk about flying. I've kind of dilly-dallied around this subject, haven't I? And it's a much bigger issue than I probably gave it credit for. My thoughts on flying have not been a great secret. I was glad to see it go. I was glad to see it go. But that was on the basis of various promises from Blizz. Gotta be said. We were promised a lot more people out in the world. Flying does take away from people being out in the world. It does. It might be more scenic, more panoramic, but it does take people out from being in the world. Unfortunately, the garrison system didn't work out as we expected, and people ended up just sat in their garrisons, so nobody's in the world anyway. Oh dear. Which is really quite sad, considering WoD does have some fantastic zones with loads going on in them. But we just tend to not see anybody there after the initial leveling rushes. I tend to see people farming Poundface, and that's about it. So I was not sad to see flying go. And then Blizzard has said, look, future expansions, flying's not really going to be a thing. And for me personally, I'm okay with it. I am okay with it. I can honestly say, without a shadow of a doubt, that there's been no point in WoD that I've felt like I wish I could fly. That hasn't happened once. And I'm being genuinely serious there. There has been no point in WoD where I felt I really wanted to fly. The flight points have been fine. Getting to a raid, we have things like Aviana's Feather and all that, so anywhere that is slightly out of the way and not near a flight point, we can get to with as faster than flying anyway. And, well, by essentially flying. So, no, it's not been a big deal for me in Warlords of Draenor. I think they did a fine job, honestly. Tanaan was a different story. If you recall the Tanaan video I did for 6.2, I said you need Aviana's Feather because that place is so dense, and the geography is really quite irritating that it can be a bit of a problem. But other than that, no, I actually quite enjoyed seeking out the treasures that were in hard-to-find places. We had things like the Nagrand Glider missions, which were quite fun. And a fly mount would have not allowed them to even exist. And several of the quests would have not allowed them to exist, in which people have responded saying, well, you could make them non-flying only. Well, you can't, because they were all over the zone. You'd have to make the entire zone non-flying in a world where they can fly, and it just didn't make any sense. It's just not a logical solution. So we did have some content that was designed around the fact that you could not fly, especially in terms of the treasures. They were designed in such a way that you couldn't fly. So for me, WoD has been fine without flying. But, and there's always a but. I'm not the only player of this game by a long fucking way. And who am I, honestly, to say how you should enjoy your game and that you're paying for? And that is a big deal. It is a big deal. We didn't get what we were promised, which is a theme running across WoD. I'm not going to turn this into a wine video by any means. There's plenty of them around. Go and have a look and enjoy yourself. But yeah, we didn't get people out in the world because there was no reason to be. Unfortunately, as sad as it was, there was no reason to be after the first month or so, once the Apexis requirement dried up and LFRs became available for everyone else and raiding was already available for other people. There was not really a reason to go and do them. So that then put a stop to anyone leaving their garrison, really, or Warspear. That's where they are. They're in Warspear and they're in their garrison. And that's about it. And beyond that, there was no reason to be out in the world. So when it gets to that stage where there's, you're not having the populace filling the zones. It's very difficult to not see a noticeable similarity between vanilla zones and the WoD zones. There's probably as equal amount of people in each one besides the major hubs. And that's about it. So from that perspective, sure, let people fly. Why? They're not out in the world anyway. So if they want to fly, let them fly. I don't see the problem with that anymore. I really don't. I only wanted no flying, honestly, because I wanted to see people out in the world at a distance and have random encounters like I've seen in the past, and was a genuinely cool aspect of the game. It was. Now, I totally understand why the people who really wanted flying to stay are not happy, because all the things that people such as myself said, hey, this is going to be cool, because you're going to have all this stuff going on in the world that you wouldn't have because of flying, hasn't happened. It hasn't happened, and I can totally agree with that. I'm never going to argue that because it hasn't happened. I can ride around Frostfire Ridge all day and bump into one or two people. That's about it. Because it just didn't work out that way. I have to agree with those who say, look, I don't want Blizzard to tell me how to enjoy their game. Why? I love my flying mounts. And I've got to say, I love my flying mounts as well. I love my drakes. I love the drakes that I attained at certain parts of other expansions. I love my flying Meccano Hot Shredder. I love all those guys. Those mounts are really cool. They're very cool. And flying around in them is also very, very cool. That is a cool part of the game. And realistically, as somebody who doesn't go back to old content for any reason, I'll probably never really see them again. And that, of course, that's a bummer. There are many people who have bought things from the shop, and you might go, hey, well, you bought it from the shop. Well, that's just a vanity thing. You still paid real money for something that could fly. And yeah, it can go on the ground, but it's got a ton of animation associated with it, which means it's flying. And who's to say those people didn't buy it because of the way it flew? Can you be that guy? I don't think you can. I don't think you can tell other people what they enjoy. I mean, that's just crazy, right? That's just crazy. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a different opinion on anything. The permanent removal of flying. It all depends for me. I don't think it's as clear cut as I want flying and I don't want flying. If it is going to be like WoD again, if we're going to have situations where there's just no reason to fly, then we should have flying. Right? If there's a scenario where there's just no real reason that we shouldn't be able to do it, then why can't we do it? Because that's totally a fair argument, and I can't disagree with that. There is no reason why, right now in WoD, why we shouldn't have flying. And that's a truth, in my opinion. I think that's got to be the way we look at it. What are we actually missing out on? Not a lot. Right? Is it going to cause problems? No. Will it put more people into the world or take more people out? Not really. No, I don't think so. I think it'd be very hard to argue that point. Obviously, your Garrison and Warspear wouldn't have flying. But other than that, is it a problem? No. A couple of treasures and the Nagrand missions would be the only things really affected, and I could live without them for the sake of saying, for the entire expansion, you can't do something you might want to do. And players want to do that, and they have had this experience for a long time. I'm not saying, and just to be clear, that I want flying back. I'm fine without it. I'm absolutely fine without it. But I can't really think of a reason, given the current situation, why we don't have it. And the best I can come up with is the Nagrand missions and some of the treasures. And that's about it. Beyond that, no justification at all. And in fact, we could even argue that given the current circumstances, if flying was to remain, we could have had some much cooler environments. Ulduar in particular, where you had to fly across the broken bridge, going up to the Storm Peaks, something along those lines. We also had high up Twilight Citadel and the Blackrock raid, all that stuff that was up and out of the way was flying only, keeping the big players away from the levelers down below and all that kind of stuff was actually quite cool. And it offsets maybe a couple of treasure missions. I totally get why people are saying I don't want Blizzard telling me how I should enjoy my game. I have a vast collection of flying mounts. There is no real reason in WoD why we don't have flying, and therefore I want flying to return. And based on WoD, and that's the way we have to look at this, based on WoD and based on the content you gave us when you took flying away, I don't trust you right now not to do this again in the next expansion. It's an absolutely fair and warranted argument. Absolutely fair. Me personally, I'm okay with it. Never needed to fly in WoD, but would anything have changed if I did have flying in WoD? No, not really. And from that perspective, it's perfectly acceptable to say, yeah, we could have had flying. So that's my stance on it for those of you who tweet me and ask me the questions on it. And I think it's totally justifiable to argue that it's not been a good change, or in fact has not been a relevant change, I think is more the point. It hasn't been a relevant change. It hasn't made a huge difference. We didn't see a significant amount of things happen other than people saying, well, I have all this flying stuff. I've paid thousands upon thousands of gold to be able to fly at the fastest speed, and then you just said it was useless once it actually got to current content. And it's obviously understandable why people are pissed off at that, because it hasn't really made any difference at all. Flying points are great, but Draenor's not a very big world. It isn't. Everything's kind of compact and nice and centralized. So it's not been like we're flying across Azeroth or anything like that. Or Kalimdor. I totally get it. And I'm on your side. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.